He thought he could shatter me with his affair. I built a life that left him in ruins. It happened on the night I thought would be one of the happiest of my life. The table was set for two. Candles flickered softly. A bottle of wine breathed quietly on the counter, waiting for him to come home. I had spent hours preparing, not just the dinner, but the moment itself. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. 6 months until our wedding. The future we had whispered about in the dark, planned out in tiny, hopeful increments. And then my phone buzzed. At first, I almost ignored it. One last check of my makeup in the mirror, one last fluff of my hair. But something made me look. A flicker of instinct, maybe. Or the universe throwing me a lifeline. It was a message from Julia, my oldest friend. No words, just a screenshot. And there, framed in the cold, unforgiving glow of my screen, was the truth. A photo of him, my fiancé Jason, smiling down at another woman, his arm wrapped around her waist in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. The caption underneath was even worse. Lucky to finally have him all to myself. 2 hearts. The walls around me shifted. The candles wavered. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh basil turned bitter in my nose. For a moment, I just stood there, the phone heavy in my hand, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But it was. Julia sent another message seconds later. I thought you should know before tonight. I'm so sorry. I set the phone down carefully, like it might explode if I wasn't gentle. And then I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the 2 plates I had so lovingly arranged, and realized the life I had built wasn't just cracked. It was broken. Jason wasn't late. He wasn't stuck in traffic. He wasn't rushing home to the woman he had promised forever to. He was already where he wanted to be, with someone else. And in that single, shattering moment, everything changed. That night, the world felt different. Smaller, colder, as if the walls had pulled in around me, forcing me to confront the truth I had been too blind, or maybe just too trusting, to see. I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of every lie I hadn't known to question. I thought about the way Jason had held me just a few nights ago, his arms warm and steady, whispering promises about our future, about the life we were building together. I thought about the way he had looked at me when he proposed. That perfect, curated moment on the beach. Sunset framing us like something out of a movie. The way he had slipped the ring onto my finger. Eyes shining, voice steady, promising forever. It had all felt so real. But now every memory felt tainted. Every shared glance, every whispered promise, every carefully planned milestone felt like a prop in a performance I hadn't realized I was a part of. I replayed our conversations in my mind, sifting through his words for clues I had missed. The nights he came home late. The weekends he claimed to be working. The texts he had answered too quickly. The calls he had ended a little too abruptly. They weren't just coincidences. They were cracks. Tiny, hairline fractures in the foundation of our relationship. So small I hadn't seen them until the whole thing began to crumble. I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood with a jolt that felt like a cruel awakening. I walked to the window, pulling back the curtains, staring out at the quiet, sleeping world beyond the glass. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alone. Truly, deeply, unshakably alone. Jason wasn't the man I thought he was. Our relationship wasn't the safe haven I had believed it to be. And if I was going to survive this, I couldn't cling to the illusion of what we had been anymore. I had to see the truth, even if it shattered everything I thought I knew. It didn't take long for the shock to harden into something colder, sharper, a kind of clarity I hadn't realized I was capable of. The morning after the text, I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, staring at the ring on my finger as if it might offer answers to the questions I hadn't yet found the strength to ask. Who is this woman? How long had this been going on? What else had I missed while I was busy planning a future he had never intended to share? I didn't rush to confront him. I didn't throw the ring at him the moment he walked through the door. Didn't scream or cry or demand explanations. Instead, I watched, listened, paid attention to the small things I had once dismissed as harmless. The glances at his phone, the way he angled his screen away from me, the sudden silences when I walked into a room, the carefully curated social media accounts he had insisted were just for work. I started noticing the way he talked about his late nights, how his stories didn't quite line up, how his explanations felt rehearsed, like he had practiced them in the mirror just enough to make them believable, but not enough to make them real. And then I found the emails. I hadn't gone looking. Not really. I had simply borrowed his laptop one morning, looking for a file he had promised to send to a vendor. And there, tucked into a hidden folder on his desktop, were the messages. Dozens of them. Photos. Inside jokes. Plans for weekends I had thought he had spent working. I felt my hands shake as I scrolled through them. Each message another piece of the life he had built without me. Each line of text another crack in the image I had clung to for so long. It wasn't just one woman. It was several. Each one with her own place in his life. Each one kept just close enough to feel special, but far enough to stay hidden. It was a double life, carefully crafted, designed to keep me in the dark, while he played the part of the perfect fiancé. And as I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the floor drop out from beneath me, I realized something else. Jason wasn't just unfaithful. He was a liar, a performer, a man more committed to the image of a good partner than to the reality of being one. And the man I thought I loved had never really existed at all. Once I accepted the truth, something inside me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't demand answers he would only twist into something palatable, something he could live with. Instead, I grew quiet. I stopped asking about his day, stopped leaning in for the goodnight kisses I used to reach for without thinking, stopped filling the silences he left behind when he came home late with excuses that no longer sounded convincing. Jason didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he chose to ignore it. He was too comfortable, too certain that I was still the woman who would forgive him anything, who would believe every half-hearted apology, who would stay because the alternative felt too big, too lonely, too final. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I started watching him more closely, not with the hopeful, loving eyes of a fiancé, but with the detached curiosity of someone studying a stranger. I noticed the way he hesitated when I asked about his schedule, the way he avoided eye contact when I mentioned mutual friends, the way his phone never seemed to leave his side anymore. Even when he slept, he was careful, but not careful enough. And the more I watched, the more I realized how much I had been missing. The text messages sent just a little too late at night. The whispered phone calls taken from the balcony. His voice low and urgent. Words I couldn't quite make out, but could still feel deep in my gut. He had built his second life on the assumption that I would never look too closely, that my love for him would blind me to the cracks in the image he had so carefully crafted. And for a long time, he had been right, but not anymore. Now every lie he told, every truth he twisted, every carefully rehearsed excuse he whispered into my ear was another brick in the wall I was quietly building between us. And one day, when I finally chose to walk away, that wall would be too high for him to ever climb over again. Once I decided to stop pretending, everything became clearer. The small things I had once brushed off as harmless now screamed at me from every corner of our life together. The late nights, the vague explanations, the too tight smiles when his phone buzzed at odd hours. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Confrontation would give him a stage, a chance to spin his lies into something manageable, something survivable. I wasn't interested in hearing his excuses. I was interested in the truth. So I started digging. It began with the basics. Checking his social media for tags, scrolling through the comments I had once ignored, looking for patterns in the people he engaged with the most. I found more than I expected. Photos from trips he swore had been work-related, but that included dinners for two, hiking trails I had never seen, sunsets I had never shared with him. I checked his email next. Not the main account he shared with me, but the secondary one he had mentioned only once. In passing, when we had first moved in together, it was surprisingly easy to find. He had saved the login on our shared laptop, apparently confident that I would never bother to look. It was full of receipts, hotel bookings, dinner reservations, concert tickets, messages from women whose names I had never heard, whose faces I had never seen, but whose words felt like sharp, twisted nails against my skin. And then, when I thought I had seen it all, I found the phone, not the one he carried every day, but a second one, tucked into the back of his desk drawer, buried beneath old receipts and dusty USB drives. The messages there were worse, more personal, more intimate, a second life, carefully constructed, hidden just far enough from my reach that he had convinced himself it would never come to light. I sat there for a long time, the phone cold in my hand, the weight of the truth pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Jason hadn't just cheated. He had lived a lie, built a lie, chosen a lie. And now that I had seen the full, ugly picture, there was no going back. I didn't break. Not the way I thought I might. Not the way he probably expected me to. There were tears, of course. Silent, burning trails down my cheeks in the dark hours of the night, when the reality of what I had uncovered felt too heavy to carry alone. But there was something else, too. Something stronger. Resolve. It crept in slowly, settling into the cracks he had carved into my heart, filling the empty spaces with a quiet, unshakable certainty. I would not be shattered by this. I would not let his betrayal define me, would not let the life I had worked so hard to build crumble just because he had chosen to lie, to cheat, to discard everything we had promised each other without a second thought. I began to see my life differently, not as a shared future, but as something entirely my own. I took stock, made lists, started pulling my finances together, reclaiming the small pieces of myself I had given away so freely over the years. I reached out to old friends, reconnected with people I had let drift away, not because I needed support, but because I needed to remember who I was before Jason had become the center of my world. I even took on a new project at work, something I would have once asked his opinion on, something he would have undoubtedly tried to steer me away from, reminding me that I needed to pace myself, to stay in my lane. I stopped listening to the echoes of his voice in my head, stopped worrying about what he might think, how he might react if he found out I was quietly building a life that no longer revolved around him. And as the days passed, the sadness that had once felt like a weight around my neck began to lift. I was still hurt, still angry, still disappointed, but I was also waking up, day by day, to the realization that I was more than the sum of his lies. I was stronger than he had given me credit for. And when the time came to truly walk away, I would do it without fear, without regret, without ever looking back. The rebuilding started quietly, almost without my noticing. Small steps at first, little shifts in my daily routine, tiny acts of self-preservation that felt like whispers in a world still too loud with his lies. I started running again. Long, punishing laps around the park in the early morning light, my breath sharp in my chest, my pulse thundering in my ears. Each footfall a reminder that my body was still my own, still strong, still capable of carrying me through the hardest days. I updated my resume, reached out to old colleagues, took meetings without telling him, knowing that if he ever found out, he would try to twist it into something about loyalty, about trust, about the shared future he had already shattered without my knowing. I stopped waiting for him to come home before I made dinner, stopped checking my phone for his messages, stopped holding my breath every time he walked through the door, wondering if tonight would be the night his lies finally caught up with him. I even found a new place to live, a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, but mine, a space where I could breathe without the weight of his expectations pressing down on me, where every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, every book on the shelf would be something I chose, something that reflected who I was without him. I didn't move out right away. I wasn't ready for that yet. But the act of claiming a new space, of signing my name on a lease without his approval or opinion, felt like a promise to myself. I was still here, still standing, still capable of building a life that didn't include him. And slowly, day by day, the version of myself I had been before he came into my life began to reappear, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. And when the time came to walk away for good, I knew I would do it without a backward glance. I wasn't alone. I hadn't realized it at first, too wrapped up in my own heartbreak to notice the small, silent gestures of support that had begun to emerge around me. It started with Julia, of course. She had been the first to show me the truth, the first to reach out with that devastating screenshot, the first to stand beside me when the world I had built came crashing down. But there were others, too. Friends I hadn't seen in months, co-workers I had let drift to the edges of my life. Even casual acquaintances who had noticed the cracks in Jason's polished exterior long before I had. It happened quietly, in the corners of coffee shops, in the whispered conversations at work, in the tentative texts from people who had seen too much and said too little for too long. A former colleague reached out first. She had known Jason in his early days at the company, back when his charm was still fresh, before his ambitions had twisted into something darker. I always thought there was something off about him, she admitted over lattes one rainy afternoon. Too smooth, too calculated. I'm so sorry I didn't say anything sooner. Another friend confessed to having caught him flirting at a networking event months ago, his arm draped casually around a woman he had claimed was just a client, his smile a little too wide, his laugh a little too forced. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, eyes downcast. "I didn't know how to tell you without sounding like I was trying to start drama." I didn't blame them. Not anymore. They had seen what I hadn't been ready to see, and their silence had been born of the same hope I had clung to for too long. The hope that I was wrong, that the man I loved wasn't the liar he had turned out to be. But now, as the pieces fell into place, I realized I wasn't the only one building a case. I wasn't the only one watching him fall apart. And when the time came, I wouldn't have to stand alone. I would have an army at my back. The thing about liars is they get comfortable. They start believing their own stories, convincing themselves that the truth will never catch up, that their carefully constructed lives will never come crashing down. Jason had reached that point. He moved through our apartment like a man without a care in the world, smiling over his morning coffee, whistling as he adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, pressing soft, absent-minded kisses to my cheek on his way out the door. He had no idea what was coming, no idea that the life he had built on half-truths and stolen moments was already crumbling beneath his feet. I let him stay comfortable, let him believe I was still the quiet, trusting fiancé who would never dare question him, never dig too deeply, never pull too hard at the threads he had woven so carefully around me. But behind the scenes, I was preparing for the moment when it would all come crashing down. I started small. Screenshots, emails, calendar invites for meetings that had never happened, texts from numbers I had never seen, filled with inside jokes and thinly veiled flirtations. I kept everything, organized it, sorted it, built a timeline that even the most generous observer couldn't explain away. And then I took it a step further. I reached out to a few of the women he had been so careful to keep separate from each other. Women who had no idea they weren't the only ones he had been lying to. Women who deserved to know the truth as much as I did. Some ignored me. Some blocked me. But a few, a brave, furious few, responded. And once we started talking, once we started comparing notes, the picture that emerged was undeniable. Jason wasn't just a cheater. He was a con artist. A man who had built his entire life on the illusion of loyalty, of integrity, of love. And when the time came to expose him, I wouldn't have to scream. I wouldn't have to beg for anyone to believe me. The truth would do the work for me. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Jason's company was hosting a charity gala, a high-profile event with executives, clients, and board members, the kind of night where appearances mattered more than anything else. Jason had been looking forward to it for weeks, eager to show off the life he had so carefully constructed, to play the part of the successful, charming fiancé in front of an audience that only saw what he wanted them to see. He asked me to come, of course. Said it would mean a lot to have me by his side. Said it would be good for our image as a couple. A chance to make an impression on people who mattered. I smiled and agreed, my heart steady, my mind already turning over the pieces I had been quietly assembling. I had never planned to expose him publicly. Had never wanted the drama, the chaos, the scene. But the more I thought about it, the more fitting it seemed. Jason had built his life on the idea of perception, on the careful manipulation of how others saw him. He had constructed his image like a stage set, propped up by lies and half-truths, designed to dazzle from a distance but crumble under the weight of scrutiny. So, I dressed carefully that night, chose a dress I knew he loved, painted on a smile that reached my eyes, and slipped my engagement ring onto my finger one last time. When we arrived, the room buzzed with energy. The clink of champagne glasses, the low hum of polite conversation, the flash of camera bulbs catching every practiced smile. Jason introduced me to colleagues, laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, rested his hand on my back in a way that felt possessive, like a man showing off a prized possession. And as he basked in the glow of his own performance, I quietly set the final pieces in place. A few words to the right people, a few strategically placed messages, a few gentle nudges to women who had been too afraid to speak up alone. By the time the evening ended, the whispers had already started, spreading through the crowd like a slow, steady fire. And Jason, for all his careful planning, had no idea that the life he had built on lies was already beginning to burn. I left quietly. No dramatic exit. No final confrontation. Just a small, steady walk toward the door, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the weight of my engagement ring still cold on my finger. I didn't look back. Didn't stop to see if he noticed me slipping away, if his eyes followed me through the crowd, if he felt the sudden chill that settled over the room as I disappeared into the night. I made it to the curb before the first tears came, hot and bitter against my cheeks. a silent, unsteady release of everything I had held back for so long. The doorman hailed a cab, his eyes kind but unreadable as he opened the door for me. And I slipped inside, pulling the door closed behind me as if sealing off a chapter one would never reopen. The city lights blurred past the window, each neon sign, each passing street lamp, a reminder of the life I had chosen to leave behind. I reached up, slid the ring from my finger, and dropped it into my purse without a second thought. It felt lighter than I had expected, like a promise already broken, a weight already lifted. I didn't go back to the apartment that night. I didn't even bother calling him, didn't check my phone for missed messages or panicked voicemails. I simply leaned back against the worn leather seat, closed my eyes, and let the quiet hum of the cab's engine drown out the echoes of his lies. When I finally got home, I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on the balcony, watching the city move around me, alive and indifferent to the end of my world. I felt empty, but I also felt free. Free of the lies, the pretense, the weight of a relationship built on nothing but carefully constructed half-truths. And as the night air cooled my cheeks, I realized something I hadn't been ready to face before. Leaving wasn't losing. It was choosing. And I had chosen myself. The days that followed felt like waking up from a long, heavy dream. I moved through my new apartment slowly, my bare feet against the cool hardwood, the sunlight streaming through windows that felt like fresh air against my skin. I painted the walls, hung art that made me smile, filled the bookshelves with stories that had nothing to do with him. I filled the fridge with food I actually liked, no longer pretending to share his love for overcooked steaks and overpriced wine. I stopped answering his calls, stopped checking my messages for his apologies, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, the way I had for so long, expecting his lies to catch up with me instead of him. Friends reached out, of course, some with pity, some with curiosity, some with quiet, hesitant questions about what had really happened, about what had finally broken between us. I told them the truth. Not the messy, tear-streaked version I had once imagined, but the calm, settled truth of a woman who had finally chosen herself over the illusion of forever. "I'm better now," I said, and meant it. I took on new projects at work, reconnected with people I had let drift away, spent long, slow weekends wandering the city, rediscovering the places I had forgotten in the haze of a relationship that had demanded all of my attention and none of my honesty. And slowly, the hurt began to fade. The anger began to soften. The shadows of what we had once been began to slip quietly into the past. No longer sharp enough to cut me. No longer heavy enough to hold me down. I had survived him. Survived the lies. The betrayal. The quiet, suffocating loss of myself. And now, standing in a home built entirely on my own terms, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Free. Not from him, but from the version of myself who had once believed his promises, who had once measured her worth through his eyes. And that, more than anything else, was the real victory.
Thanks so much for watching. If you love a good revenge story, or if you've ever dreamed of getting the last word without saying much at all, you're in the right place. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new savage ending. Because around here, karma always hits different.